What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Nemo Propaganda here, and today we're going to check out the IotaVX SA40. Why are we doing that? Well, so many of you guys in the comments of my other videos have complained for quite a while. Maybe not complained, but you've said, why don't amplifiers have HDMI ARC? I want HDMI ARC in my amplifier. It's 2024. It's a modern feature. Why aren't we seeing it? Boom, here you go. The IotaVX SA40 does have HDMI ARC and a slew of other features. Let's get those main specs on screen so you guys can check that out. I will tell you about the specs and standout features I find unique or interesting, what the amplifier sounds like, how it stages, all those sound quality descriptors. I'll tell you how it paired up with other speakers. I found an outstanding pairing that was almost end game level performance with just so much synergy. I'm going to tell you about that. I'll tell you how it compares to some other amplifiers, what you can expect if you're coming from something more affordable, maybe something like a Denon PMA 600 NE, for example. Is this a worthy upgrade, right? We're going to get into all of that. So, standout features, obviously HDMI ARC is a big standout feature. And the reason a lot of people like that is it allows you to connect the stereo you might have in your living room in a shared space to your TV via an HDMI cable, and you don't have to use a different remote control to adjust volume. Yes, the TV remote control will adjust your stereo's volume if your stereo has HDMI ARC, so it's easy for the kids, it's easy for the wife. If you have roommates, it's easy for them, so on and so forth. And look, no one likes dual wielding remote controls. It's a great modern feature to have, and I love to see it. Of course, there's a ton of other digital inputs, analog inputs, subwoofer output, pre-output. This thing has features, remote control, of course, tone controls, A and B sets of speakers. By the way, the remote control, really nice. This is going to be one of my favorite remote controls. And I find it odd because most amplifier companies have a hard time making a good remote control. In many reviews, I've complained about remote controls. Don't get me started on the remote control Denon uses on the PMA 600 NE. It is absolutely atrocious. It's huge. It feels like it was pulled out in 1980. But I digress. This review isn't about Denon. It's about IotaVX SA40. The remote control, it's the right size. It's not so thin that it feels cheap in the hand, but it is slim and sleek, and it works well. It looks good. I love to see that. I want to see more companies designing nice remote controls for their nice equipment. What's another standout feature that I want to talk about? Power. This thing has plenty of power. IotaVX claims 150 watts by 8. By 2 at 8 ohms, and doubling at 300 watts into 4 ohms times 2. And the reason I say claims is because they don't give us a frequency or THD reference, so that makes it a little bit hard to be 100% sure. But listen, this thing, it's got a large transformer. You can see it right through the top, so I have no doubt it has plenty of power. But look, I compliment brands when they give us that wideband 20 to 20 with THD reference specs. So I'm going to express a little bit of dissatisfaction when I see that missing entirely, and I just had to mention that. So another standout feature is going to be the IotaVX, much like the SA3 had an option to add a power amp and turn it into dual mono blocks. The SA40 has that same option. There's an optional power amplifier you can add, and it turns the whole system into dual mono blocks. The stereo amp in here bridges, as does the mono block, and you have tremendously more wattage capability if that's something you need. Maybe you've got a very large room figure, 25 by 35 feet, 12, 13, 14 foot ceilings, maybe vaulted ceilings, 18, 20 feet high, right? You might need a tremendous amount of power, but I think the SA40 has plenty of power for most rooms, most speakers. I didn't have any issues. I didn't come anywhere close to maxing out this amplifier in terms of its output. So what does it sound like? Because let's be honest, A and B sets of speakers, subwoofer output, pre-output, HDMI ARC, tone controls, nice remote control, all that doesn't really matter if the amplifier doesn't have good sound quality for the money. So this thing costs $1,100. Let's talk about mid-range first. We don't usually do that. We usually talk about treble first. So if you followed my content for a while, you'll remember when I reviewed the original IotaVX SA3, not just me, anytime someone else reviewed it, whether it was Thomas in Stereo, Sean from Zero Fidelity, everyone talked about the mid-range, how they absolutely nailed it and did a really good job with the mid-range. Now, this might be a good time to stop and tell you that the reason I wasn't sure if they were going to nail that mid-range or not is IotaVX is under new ownership. So if you were one of those people that was interested in the brand and maybe stayed away because you heard they didn't have the best customer service, they didn't have the best communication, this is a new company, essentially. New ownership, new team. They seem to be taking communication and customer service very seriously. Love to see that. So if you took them off your list, put them back on your list, right? And again, that's why I was wondering, were they able to nail the mid-range? They didn't just nail the mid-range, they just tremendously took it to another level. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. So tonally, ever so slightly warm. But its combination of its soundstage performance, which is wide, very deep in both directions, with a good amount of height, and its pinpoint imaging, the way those two combined give you a three-dimensional and holographic soundstage in a way you just don't generally see around this price. This is going to be more similar to something like the Purist Choco Ime. That amplifier is about $1,700. It's a Purist piece. And when I reviewed that amp, I told you guys I felt it competed with amplifiers that were double the price, even more, up to about $4,000. And I meant that. The IotaVX SA40, I'm not saying all of its sound quality characteristics are on par with the $4,000 amp, but the way the imaging and soundstage work together to give you that dimensionality in holographics certainly is on par with amplifiers, at least twice its price, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Mid-range absolutely blew me away. It's absolutely the star of the show. It is incredibly good for this price category. I was so impressed. I tried every speaker I had here. The Bucard S400, of course. It had no problem with that speaker. Sounded great. ATC SCM11, of course. Harder to drive speakers like the CSS Crichton 1TD. That's a bass monster. It needs a lot of power, no problems. The new SVS Ultra Evolution Nano. That's a little speaker. Hard to drive, no problems. Then there was one speaker I tried. And this is the one I told you about in the beginning. That was just the synergy was off the charts. Off the charts. Because this is a speaker that's already fairly holographic in the mid-range on its own. And this is an amp that's fairly holographic in the mid-range on its own. And when I combine the two, my God, this was phenomenal. And I'm talking about the Totem Bison. That's a fairly small speaker. It's about $2,250 for the pair, I want to say. That combination was just synergy. Oh my God. The holographics I was getting out of that combination would have you think you're listening to a full tube amplifier. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm really not. I could not believe it. I can't tell you how many times I came down here to listen, to get some listening impressions of the IotaVX SA40. And I told myself 30 minutes, 1 hour, that's what we're going to do. And 3 hours went by. I could not get up out of the listening chair. I just kept on wanting to listen to the next song. I wasn't skipping songs halfway through. Sometimes when we're listening critically, we don't listen to the whole song. Maybe just the intro, just that middle part, just the drop, right? We want to hear something. No, sir. I was listening to entire songs all the way through for 2 to 3 hours because I was enjoying myself so much. So look, if you have this amplifier and you're not sure what speakers you want to pair it with, strongly consider the Totem Bisons and vice versa. Maybe you've got the Totem Bisons and you've got an inexpensive amp. You're not sure what you want to upgrade to. Strongly consider the IotaVX SA40. This pairing just really surprised me. So we've only talked about mid-range so far. Let's jump back up to that treble. Let's talk about that because that's really important too. A lot of people sensitive to that treble region, of equipment. How is it? It is very good, very refined for the money, ever so slightly smooth with its attack. Treble quantity overall, fairly neutral. Detail retrieval, fairly good. Imaging is really where the treble shines. Very precise without seeming artificial. Precise yet natural, right? And again, as I said, it's that combination of imaging precision, naturalness, soundstage and sound field depth, width and height that just give it that depth and dimensionality that just give you this holographic presentation that's so good. And look, if I keep saying it, I'm trying to drive the point home because you just don't generally get that in and around this price. So that's the treble. Let's talk about the bass. Look, the amp's got plenty of power. You're not going to have any complaints about bass. It's going to drive most loads without any issues. If your speaker's got a ton of bass or a woofer that likes to have a lot of excursion, this amp's going to drive them no problem, control those woofers just fine. So, and as far as tonal, bass descriptors, the bass was fairly linear and fairly neutral. It wasn't boosted at any one frequency or anything like that. Linear affair, right? So that's what it sounds like. I told you about the standout features. Let's talk about the additional power amp real quick. So when Thomas reviewed the SA40, he said he felt like the amp on its own was just all right. He didn't say it was bad or anything like that, but he said, it was good. But it seemed like he felt that the amplifier was really great when you added the accompanying power amplifier, which is an additional cost. It almost doubles the price of the kit. But he felt that's what was really impressive, that stacked together. I'm actually on the total opposite side of the spectrum here. I think the amplifier on its own is so impressive that IotaVX might not like me saying this, but just get the amp. You don't need the other amp, honestly. Look, by all means, if you want it, get it. But I think the amp on its own is plenty impressive and has excellent and outstanding performance for the money. I don't think you need to add the accompanying power amp. I really don't. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Look, I review a lot of stuff, and when stuff's good, I tell you guys. And if you guys ask me if you should buy something, if I think it's good, I tell you. But I also try to preach financial responsibility, right? No one should go bust, buying hi-fi gear and audio gear. I don't want anyone draining their kids' college fund buying audio gear, right? The economy's not in the strongest position. Has anyone been in the grocery store recently? Stuff has gotten expensive. Don't get me started on the cost of gas and utilities. Oh my goodness, we all need to be a little bit more mindful. And this is an area where I just got to say, the amp on its own performs flawlessly. I just don't think you need any more power than this thing can offer. I digress. What can you expect if you have something more inexpensive and you're looking for an upgrade? Let's start with IotaVX's own SA3 first. Let's say you got that, 5-6 years ago and you see this new one, you're a fan of the brand. What can you expect? So the IotaVX SA3 was a great amp. It was about $500 and it performed very well for the money. Let's start with the treble. The SA40 is going to give you a treble region that is substantially more refined. It's going to have clearer distinction between the transients and the treble. The different sounds are going to have more air and space between them. Just overall much better treble quality without, sounding too different. The tonal characteristic between the SA3 treble and the SA40 treble is fairly similar. A little smooth with the attack, good detail and detail retrieval. The SA40 just does it all a lot better, so it's definitely worth considering as an upgrade. Moving down to the mid-range, both amps have a good mid-range. Again, the SA40 just takes that to another level. It does everything the SA3 does, just way better. Better imaging, larger staging, fuller sense of scale, more effortless presentation, and more holographic overall. Both amps have no problem driving difficult loads, but the larger SA40 I did notice had just ever so slightly better note-to-note distinction in the bass frequencies, and that's what you can expect if you go from the SA3 to the SA40. Let's say you got something around the same price, Denon PMA 600 NE. What can you expect? Well, you're going to get a lot more of an open and effortless top end out of the SA40 compared to the Denon PMA 600 NE, to the point you might feel that Denon is a little bit congested in the higher frequencies. Now, on its own and for its price, the Denon is not a bad amp. The 600 NE is loved by many people, but again, by direct comparison, you're going to feel like the top end of the SA40 is just way more effortless, more clarity, more air and space between everything, and just a more refined experience. Both amps lean warm in the mid-range. The Denon leans much warmer tonally, but the IotaVX SA40 is more natural, more organic, much larger with its staging, much more precise with its imaging, and much more holographic overall. Moving down to the bass, I did feel the Denon PMA 600 NE's bass was just eh. The SA40 is substantially better, honestly, from top to bottom, just being honest here. Let's say you got something more affordable though, like let's say you got something like an inexpensive Fosse amplifier. I've heard quite a few of those. I've reviewed one of them. Let's say you got something like the DA2120C. That's like a $179 amplifier, and a lot of people like to pretend those inexpensive Class D amps are as good as something that's like $500 or $1,000. Let's find out. How does it compare? So the Fosse DA2120C at $179 is a fine amplifier. There's nothing wrong with it at that price. But when we compare it to something 5 times the price like the IotaVX SA40, listen, the difference in treble refinement is so wide that if you A-B compare the two amps, that little Fosse amp is going to sound grainy and gritty and brash and harsh in the treble region by direct comparison. That's how much more refined something like the SA40 is. Huge difference in air, space. The Fosse is going to sound congested by direct comparison. Moving down to the mid-range, again, another big night and day difference. That Fosse is going to lean thin, cool, and lean. The IotaVX SA40 tonally is going to just sound more musical, more organic, more emotional, much larger sound stage. Something I've noticed with a lot of the inexpensive Class D desktop amps, they stage fairly small. You might not notice it if you only sit in 2 feet from the speakers, but in a room, they don't stage large at all. Imaging is more precise on the IotaVX SA40. Just overall, the mid-range is superior. Moving down to the bass, same affair. The bass of a lot of inexpensive Class D amps is boosted. It's not linear. It's not accurate. It can be fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if you want that kind of experience out of something like the SA40, you can certainly use the tone controls. But the IotaVX SA40 is much more linear, much more accurate, a lot better control, better transients, better note-to-note distinction, so on and so forth. So huge upgrade coming from something under $200 like the Fosse DA2120C. Now, some of you guys might want to know how it compares to stuff its price, like the Emotiva TA2, like the Outlaw RR2160. Well, if you follow my content, you know when I reviewed the Outlaw RR2160, I told you guys that comparison is going to need its own video. So this is just a friendly reminder. I will do a 3-way comparison where I compare the IotaVX SA40, Outlaw RR2160, and Emotiva TA2 against each other, because these 3 amps are roughly similar in price, have very, much the same like feature set. There's a lot of similarities. And I could see a lot of customers being like, I'm just not sure which one to get. So I'll point out the differences and help you guys just be better, in a better spot to make a decision if you're kind of on the fence on one of these, right? So that'll come in maybe a few days, maybe a week, maybe 2. We'll see. So with that said, this is the key takeaway. Really good treble region. Mid-range is the true star of the show with the holographics that you just don't generally see around this price. Bass is pretty good, no complaints. Nice remote control. Love to see that. Not a lot of complaints. I only actually have 2 complaints. One of them I already mentioned. I wish IotaVX would reference frequency and THD when discussing wattage. I feel like that's industry standard. And I do wish it had dual subwoofer outputs. It does have a single summed mono sub out, and it does have pre-outs that you could use to run dual subwoofers, but I'd like to see a second a second summed mono sub output. I think that would have been nice, but either way, you can totally dim the lights that are around this knob and the power button, if anyone's wondering about that. So look, we're at the tail end of the video. That's everything I wanted to tell you about the IotaVX SA40. I think it's worth every penny of its price, and I think most people are going to enjoy this sound. This is a sound that I think is going to satisfy a wide variety of people, and with that, this video is over. This YouTube channel does have a free Discord. Link is in the description of all my videos. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. A lot of people don't watch the whole video, so I appreciate those few of you that are so dedicated. You watch the whole video. Until next time, guys, take care.